a little wider. Brings ball back for Marshall. The footwork. Benji Marshall. Now with speed. The footwork again. Away from Peachy. Passes without looking. Away for Richards. Back to Fitzhenry. That is as good as you will see.
Hi guys, welcome back to NRL SuperCoach Tragics podcast. I'm coach of the Tigers for Life, and tonight we've got no Dano, so you'll have to excuse me. I don't know what I'm doing, but I'll have a crack. So tonight we've got a couple of special guests. We've got one which is Barnsley from the NRL All-Stars. So how are you going, Barnsley?
Yeah, good, mate. Thanks for having me on. It's exciting. I don't normally do too many of the video podcasts. I jump on a couple of the other ones that are just the audio and stuff, but it's nice to get a video one up and going. So, yeah, cheers for having me. I'm going well and looking forward to State of Origin on Sunday.
All right. So what we'll do before we go any further is what we always do with our guests is we like to talk a little bit about what you do. So can you tell everyone out there about your podcast? Because it's actually one of my favourite pods. So I'd like other people out there that do follow us to know about it.
Yeah, cheers. I appreciate you guys listening to it as well. Look, NRL All-Stars podcast started off as the NRL SuperCoach All-Stars podcast probably about 5 years ago. And it was just SuperCoach, and the idea around it was, the All-Stars moniker and everything was all about getting a lot of different people to come on with me from the SuperCoach community and stuff. So certainly all the past winners have been on and so forth. And obviously podcast community grew and got a lot bigger. So some of those people like Wilfred branched out, did the champions and everything else, but they still all come back on board and everything. So moved on in the last year. It's been really exciting because I obviously am a SuperCoach Tragic, but I'm also an NRL Tragic. So I do like talking about NRL, and I've had the privilege of doing that a little bit on other podcasts and stuff. But now we've got 2 episodes a week. So one of the NRL All-Stars episodes is the SuperCoach episode, which we do TLT each Tuesday and different things with that. And then at the end of each week, we record an NRL episode, and that's got people from just all around the Traps fans and different people from the SuperCoach community that want to talk NRL as well as special guests. We've got Jamie Soward I'm recording with tomorrow to do a really good podcast and looking forward to on the NRL too. So, yeah, if anyone wants to give us a listen, we're everywhere. You can find the NRL All-Stars podcast, and certainly subscribe and jump on Twitter and find us too.
Yeah, I find the one on rugby league very interesting, and I'm really looking forward to hearing the Jamie Soward one. I listened to the one you did the other day with Kane and Percy. I've listened to a few of them going back, the different people you've done, which have all been interesting. So one more question, or 2 more questions. What's your SuperCoach name?
Barnstormers.
Barnstormers?
Yep.
Right. And how did you go last week, mate?
So last week, it's the worst week to come on the Tragics podcast. the month before last week, I had really good Green Arrows. And actually, 2 weeks in a row, I won like 10 out of 10 head-to-heads. And then the third week, I won 8 out of 10 head-to-heads. And they're all cash comps aside from 1 or 2, I think. So that was all really good. And it was all Green Arrows as well. So I've mentioned on the podcast, I've had a bit of a yo-yo time the last couple of months in particular, where I'd have 2 really bad weeks and then have to catch for a couple and then actually make up ground again. So yeah, last week, unfortunately, is the first time in a month that I've gotten the Red Arrows. Got right around the 1,200 mark, managed to beat Tim Moody in a head-to-head, so that was a plus, but I only won 2 out of my 10 head-to-heads with that score. And I didn't even really feel like I went that badly looking at my team and stuff. I thought it was okay. I had Captain Cleary. It was all right. And then, yeah, I just had a look and went, wow, I've dropped to like just over 4,500 in rank, or 4,500 in rank, I should say, about 600 spots from where I was. So, yeah, so clawing back to that top 1,000, aiming for the round 17 bye. At the start of the year, I started off on fire. The first few weeks, I was closing in on top 500, and it's obviously the quick fall from grace there, but I reckon I'll hopefully get back there in the next few weeks.
Yeah, bye rounds can be interesting. You often get a lot of movement up and down through the buys. It's the one that I try to navigate through, but 4K is a good rank, especially for most of the guys in this pod. We apart from myself, we don't have many lower than, I don't know, I won't shoot numbers. I'll just let them.
Well, it's one of those years too, though, Glenn, where I think that you'll find, like, obviously I've had Tim on the podcast, and I've had Wilfred, a lot of guys, past winners and stuff. VK, I try and get on, but he's jumped on a couple of years ago, but it's kind of gone a bit quiet. of late, but like everybody I talked to, the first month actually started really badly. All the past winners or past top teners and stuff, none of them started well. So I think a lot of them were actually clawing. So it was a bit of a funny season this year, I think.
Yeah, the start was a bit sketchy. It's good. We had Tim on a couple of rounds ago, and Wilfred's been promising us every round, but he can't seem to negotiate the time with his work. But I've been in under Mortals comp with Wilfred for years, and he's having a good season this year. So Roscoe, how you doing, mate?
Yeah, good.
Yeah, and how'd your week go, mate?
Ah, shit.
Oh, really?
In a nutshell, I got 1162, which I thought might have been not too bad, but dropped about 2,000 and something spots, and all the way down to 21k now. So bit of a fall from grace after finishing 159 last year, but I've had some green arrows the last few weeks, but last week was just one of those weeks. I picked all the wrong reserves, left a heap of points on the bench, and yeah, it was just like that. So yeah, got to try and get some numbers up for round 17 and claw my way back with a bit of luck.
You'll get there, Roscoe.
Yeah.
What about you, Tim? How you going, mate?
Yeah, evening, boys. Good to be back on again after a couple of weeks off. Joys of being a school teacher, and this time of year we like to do our school camps in the middle of winter for some really, really strange reason. So I had year sevens up the sunny coast last week for 3 nights and for 3 days and 2 nights, and yeah, it was interesting doing the graveyard shift, walking around at midnight trying to catch kids out doing maybe not so much of the right thing, but no, they were really good actually. It was a good camp to go on. I think it was too bloody cold for any of them to go outside after about 10:30, so that made my job a bit easier. Yeah, look, boys, last week, not a bad week actually. I had a good week, but the result didn't come through, which was quite surprising. At a 12-17, which, like what Barnsley said, I thought low 1200s was looking all right. I actually got a red arrow, first at red arrow in a while, and dropped back. It was only 307 places, but when you're trying every week to claw back up, it was a bit of a tough one to take. So I'm back in 19,100. So like Roscoe, it's nowhere near the top 250 that we were last year, but it's sometimes you just take it. Like what Barnsley said, it's a lot of us started differently this year, trying to do different things, and I started back in 85k after about round 3, and lots of green arrows since then. But unfortunately now it's getting to a point where you just got to do things a little bit differently again. So I've tried to hold trades. I've still got 13 trades left. I've got 1 boost left. I had cash in the bank. I used that to make 2 higher ceiling centre wing upgrades last week that I wasn't necessarily planning on, but I figured it's about time where I've got to do something. Otherwise I'm going to get stuck in 20k. So yeah, at this stage I've got 11 for round 17, and that's before trades this week. So yeah, things should hopefully be up and up. At this point I'm aiming for 10k. If I can get from 85, 90k, whatever, back to 10k, I think that's not a bad shout for clawing my way back, and then go back to the drawing board for next season.
Interesting. We'll talk more about it next week when we do our pod, about mentioning some of the pods to people. Like, a lot of people are building very similar sides, and I don't think that they understand that if you have the same side, you're not going to achieve, you're going to pretty much stay where you are, especially at the end. A lot of teams tend to build very similar sides, so you really need to get those 1 or 2 high ceiling pods in there. So my round wasn't too bad. It started off really good, and then it kind of declined. So I ended up with 1,258. I actually played Tim this week and won. But before bragging, he's actually paid me twice this year and won both those. So, it's 2-1 his way. And I moved up to 6k. So, which is, I only went up about 400, so it wasn't a big jump. So look, tonight what we're going to do, guys, we're going to talk about State of Origin. I don't think there's much point talking about Supercoach this round. We'll get onto that next week. And so what I brought Barnsley on, because he always likes to talk footy, I thought we'll talk about the New South Wales and the Queensland side. So what we'll do is we'll start first with the New South Wales side, and I'll just quickly read out so people know what they are. There was 5 changes and there was 8 adjustments, if you like, in the side. So I'll just let me go here. So the ins are Burton, Apai, Gerbo, Gus and Talakai. The outs are Whiten because of COVID, and then Staggs, RCG, Maddo and Sims were hooked. So we'll talk about those. And then obviously we had Burton's come in into centre. Critter's also come into centre. Apai's come on to start for Cook. Gerbo's come on to start for RCG. And Murray has come in onto the second row spot for Sim. So we'll start with you, Mark. I just ask you first, what do you think about the changes? Is there any there that you didn't like coming in, or is there any there that you thought should have been there?
I didn't mind the changes, to be honest. I actually thought they were quite good. And I think there's probably 3 key points that are really overblown with all the changes. And it happens all the time with the media. They want to sensationalise any changes and stuff. But I find it funny. Like when I see Damien Cook's been dropped as a headline, I just find that hilarious because, there's at this day and age, if you've got 2 hookers and one of them's going to play the first 20 and the other's going to play 60, who cares? Harry Grant was playing off the bench for the Storm all the time and still considered probably the Australian hooker on form. Like, really doesn't make any difference. So you see a lot of those headlines and you just sort of think it's silly. The other one was the amount of changes, like people are talking about 8, 9 changes and this sort of stuff, when the reality is, some of those guys have been cycled in for different reasons. So some of those changes, Clint Gutherson is considered a change. He's not. He's coming in because they want a legitimate fullback to cover for Teddy because they're going to Perth for a week. All those guys outside the 17, you can't even consider them changes because they were never going to play anyway, and they're there for specific cover, which Fittler spoke about. So I don't mind any of those. In fact, I wouldn't even look past the top 18 squad anyway. As far as the guys that are going to actually play, I like what New South Wales did as far as I think they've adjusted to the ruck. And I'm not one that really prescribes to its panic because you've got 3 games in the series and you've got to win, and you got to win 2 of them. And one's already out the door for New South Wales. You lose this one, you're done. So why aren't you going to make changes? You're going to persist with guys that didn't work in round 1. And some of them, I didn't think it was their fault. So just really quickly with the players, you've got guys coming in, like a Talakai off the bench is someone who can get fast play the balls, but by a token of getting the tackle breaks, he actually breaks tackles and has half break tackles, which don't get measured a lot, where there's guys hanging off him to the side where he ends up with no markers a lot and he can play the ball quickly. So again, all this stuff is to negate all the ruck problems. Angus is a really good power runner and he's also quite fast over the 10 to 15 metre mark. So that leg speed that he has, he gets quick play the balls as well as half breaks. That's very different to a Regan Campbell-Gillard. It's very different even to a Tarek Sims. Those guys aren't very good at fast play the balls or dominating the ruck. They're bash and barge guys. So it makes total sense, and it's adjusted on how the game was called in the first game. So I quite liked it all. Matt Burton, I think, is fantastic. I never would have had Staggs there to begin with. I would have had Campbell Graham and I would have had Crichton, and that was quite easy picks for me. But I think in the form that Matt Burton's been in the last 6 weeks, it's kind of the opposite to some of the other picks. Like there's guys that people have sort of stuck solid with on both camps that maybe haven't been in form. Whereas Burton is a genuine guy where New South Wales need a winner coming off a loss. And they're looking at a guy now that's been in at least, 4 to even 6 weeks of really quality form who solves the kicking problem for New South Wales because Cleary really struggled as the only kicker. Luai isn't a strong kicker. Damien Cook isn't the best kicker out of dummy half anyway. And then you've got Matt Burton coming in who can attack with kicks more than probably anyone else in the competition. So that solves that. So I feel like every single change pretty much solved a problem for New South Wales from game 1. And it wasn't problems that I think Brad Fittler necessarily would have had to have known about going in, and that gets spoken about a lot too. And not to go on about it, I'll give you another 30 seconds. I'll leave it to you guys. But like Corey Parker was going on about it, the last couple of days saying New South Wales weren't prepared and this and that at state of origin, you're not going to get penalties. Well, yeah, but if you're standing at the 6-7 metre mark, you're going to get penalised even if it's origin. And if you're holding guys down 30 seconds more than what you should be, then you're going to get penalised. I'm not saying that was happening all the time, but the point is they're still going to get penalties blown. So I just think that was probably more lenient in the ruck than what we've seen before. And New South Wales have adjusted. And at the end of the day, it was only a 6-point, difference. The Queensland squad, what can you say? They won game 1 and they've stuck strong and they should have because they had a fantastic performance. So you have to back what they've done in game 1 and say that it was good that they stuck strong as well.
Yeah, I agree with all that. I'll move on to the boys and other boys in a second. So I've got one more question to ask you. What about Maddo? Did you think he deserved to be dropped?
I didn't. No, that was probably the one that I wouldn't have done because he is someone that can play better than what he did and that he's in good form and he's a big body, but also someone that has a bit of agility and he can get the fast play the balls and things as well. I thought he was just unlucky. But at the same time, I think that Fittler explained it pretty well in the Blues camp as well with Alexander said they didn't want to be weak if they had to cover a centre spot and they had Stephen Crichton there before. Talakai is the best bet for that. he's better at Maddo at covering an outside back going down.
Yeah.
But he can also play in the middle pretty much as well as what Maddo can, or on an edge. So I think Madison is unlucky, but I think it makes sense. And I do think that Angus is a better fit for that type of role anyway that Madison had.
Yeah, I think if you've seen the side that I posted in the chat that we talk, I had Burton as my 14. I had Campbell Graham and I had Critter as my centres. So I always had him in the mix. I really like Burton. I like that connection he's got with the Panthers. What I like about Maddo, though, that I didn't get to see in that game, which I think he would have offered New South Wales, is the offloading game and that second phase play.
Yeah.
And as you point out rightly, we didn't get to see that. Yeah. I'll come. Sorry, Matt. Mate, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, you're right. I was just agreeing with you. It's all good. It's just a shame that he didn't get to perform well. I don't think he had the opportunity to. So I think that he's probably the only one that I'd say was unlucky. I think the rest are pretty much fair enough, really.
Yeah, I agree with the dropping of every single player. Sims should never have been there in the start for mine, nor Stags. I'll come to you now, Ross. Just before I do, I'll let other people know what the extended bench is. So that's Sawali, McLean, Radley, Hines, and Gutho. I like all of them bar McLean. So I'll come back to you again on the 5 ins and outs, Ross. What do you think about the additions and the subtractions?
Look, I don't mind it. There's obviously a couple that I'm still a bit scratching my head at. I'm not sure how Liam Martin's still getting a starting spot after his shocker in the first game. I didn't think he really brought much in. He didn't make many meters. I think Campbell Gillard was probably a bit unlucky to get dropped too. I think he should probably kept the bench spot over Junior Paulo myself. Gerbo, I don't mind his selection. I mean, we probably missed him that first game. He just, just the way he defends, he's just such a good defender. I know he's not playing his best footy this year, but he will bring a lot to that team. He really will. Maddo was probably unlucky too, to be honest with you. But again, like Mark said, I get why Freddie's done it. But he probably could have, I don't know, he probably could have got a bench spot maybe. I'm good to see Matt Burton get a go. I think it'll take a bit of pressure off Cleary with his kicking game as well. The only other change I would have made is I know Tupu didn't have a bad first game and probably didn't warrant to get dropped, but I probably would have had O'Carr in the team, to be honest with you. But other than that, look, I think we've got to make changes. That's the thing. We've been completely dominated, in the ruck that first game, so we had to make changes. And when Harry Grant and Carrigan came on, they just destroyed us through the middle, and we just didn't recover from it. I think we did well to only lose by 6 points. So yeah.
It's interesting to point out the second rows, Ross, because my original side had Angus and Madison as my second rowers. I thought I like Martin and I like Murray, but I think they offer better, just my own personal opinion, better through the middle. And I think that they got good leg speed to come on, like that leg speed coming on later after the 20 minutes with the forward sort of tire. And the other one you mentioned was Gerbo. I think that what Gerbo brings to the side is not just what he brings on the field, it's what he brings off the field. And I agree with you on Josh Adokar. He should have at very least made the extended squad based on what he's done in the past. And I wonder how that affects morale within the side. So I'm going to come to you, Tim. I don't expect much from you being a Queenslander, but we'll give you a crack. What do you think of the New South Wales additions and subtractions?
Yeah, look, boys, I think from the changes that they've made, I like Gerbo. He's not as quick as what he used to be. He's still got a bit of ball playing ability, but the thing that Gerbo does really, really well is he slows down the tackles. You watch him in any of the Manly games, he seems to spend a lot more time. He gets away with a lot, I think, but he seems to spend a lot more time holding down the play, and that's what New South Wales needed to do. They need to slow down the speed of the ruck from Queensland. And that's exactly what Gerbo's good at these days. He's a player that's always played to his strengths, and that's definitely his strength now as he's getting a bit older. Berto coming into centre, I think he'll play that left side outside of Luai. Obviously, when he was there playing with the Panthers last year, he did unbelievably well for the first half of the season, well, for basically the whole season. Yeah. I think the big plus there is he's only one more player out than what Luai will be in attack. So that way, it's really easy just to flick that extra pass out and go to Berto to put up those big spiraling torpedo bombs that he does that are unbelievably difficult to catch. So I see that as a massive plus. So they can go to Luai or go that extra pass out to Berto for the kick. I think that's something that's, like we were saying before, it's going to take the pressure off Nathan Cleary. But I think it's a really good attacking play for them to not always have to go to Luai. If he can run the ball a little bit closer to the line, Berto can sit a bit deeper and then get a kick away if they need to. The other one, Liam Martin, I would have preferred to have Matto there instead of Liam Martin. I think the ball playing ability that gets overlooked a fair bit from Matto would be more of an asset than what Liam Martin does. Liam Martin's very good at the crash plays and things like that, gets the ball close to the line. He's bloody hard to tackle, I understand that. But I just think Matto, with his ball playing ability, has a lot more to offer than what Liam Martin does. Outside of that, boys, I'm much more afraid of this New South Wales team than I was in game one. And despite no Turbo and no Trell, that I think this is just about, I know it's got to be close to the best team you guys could have picked, as far as fixing the problems that they had from game one.
I'll just throw in there too, because I didn't mention Gerbo. Like I've been completely against Gerbo being picked, and I actually applauded the Blues camp for not doing it in game one, because all the panels and everything went nuts about it. But at the end of the day, I kind of think that Gerbo got his veteran treatment for the last 2 years. Like I don't think Gerbo's played anywhere near his best for the last 2 years of footy, and it's kind of gone very under the radar because he's a nice bloke and he seems like an absolute champion. People don't want to have a go at him about it or seem to be critical of it when he hasn't played well for 2 years, really. And by well, I mean by his standards, obviously still a solid NRL player. So I think the last 2 years he was lucky to get in, and it wasn't on form. It was based on the morale, the good bloke and the leadership and everything else. But at some point that has to end. And he just, I did stats for it on the All Stars podcast. He's making one hit up every 12 minutes and he's not making any meters on it at all. And the only thing, he's got one tackle break for the year. He's got one offload for the year. He's got no tries. He's got no line breaks. The only thing that he had going for him still is that he makes a lot of tackles. And they're not tackles where he hurts anyone, like Regan Campbell-Gillard belting anyone either. So I was all aboard him not being anywhere near the side round one, and I applauded the Blues. I think his stocks went up because of what was just said then. He does slow down things. I still question it, but he does offer more mobility too, because if you see Gerbo is now a prop for the New South Wales side, and you have someone like Campbell-Gillard that definitely has his place in the right type of game, but in this type of game, if we're looking for a bit more speed in the ruck, agility and quickness, he upticks all that. So I was heaps against him in the first game, but the second game, I think his stocks went up a little bit more. So I don't hate it. I still don't love it, but I think he fits in a lot better now with the style that they're looking at.
I think too that we're pretty low on stocks for front row forwards in New South Wales. I mean, we haven't got Safidi there that year, who was always good for us last year, and he's just way out of form, not even starting for his team. And then you've got Paulo, who's not really in form. You've got Campbell-Gillard, who, as I said, was probably a bit unlucky to get dropped. But other than outside that, there's not really much for us to choose from. Like, you look at Queensland, and they've got plenty to choose from. They're just stacked up. There's a plenty to choose from. We just don't have those options this year.
Even though Queensland have got a lot to choose from, though, like I will say, I think it sort of plays to the sort of team that Queensland has too, because Papali only played 22 minutes in game one.
That's right.
And he's one of the big fellas, and that's like the old school sort of prop. Collins did a lot of good stuff, but he was the only legitimate prop that actually played okay minutes. Carrigan and Tino, they're both back rowers. They played a prop role, but they're actually back rowers, much like Gerbo, really, but they're more in their prime. And then also the lock, Cotter's as small as halfbacks, and he's playing in the middle too. So I think the New South Wales have kind of matched it. And I wouldn't be surprised if guys like Angus Crichton actually get thrown on as a front row forward, because I think that's the style that New South Wales are going to move to quick up that ruck and actually move the Queensland forwards around and fix the problems.
That's actually what I was going to say a second ago, was that I think that's where Maddo could have been better. So I would have had Murray. I feel like that he's a lock anyway, who could play through the forwards. The way the modern game's changing is it's more about those smaller players with the leg speed around the ruck than it is about those big bodies. As you point out, Puppy only played 20 minutes because for that first 20 minutes where the big barge is on, that's where you'd want your Haas and your RCG or your Haas and your Borlo starting. And then you'd have someone like Murray come on after 20 and you could play him through the front row and then move Madison into the second row. There's a lot of versatility. I think New South Wales have a lot more depth than I think you realise. It's just not so much in those big bopper front rows. So I don't believe we need. And I just wanted to make one more comment on Burton. So you said that you think that New South Wales are using to put up those big kicks. I don't believe they will. The line speed of Queensland and New South Wales in an origin match would be too fast for it to get to him in those sort of sets where he bombs it down. But what I do see him playing in a kicking role is those shorter kicking. So when they're down in the opposition 20 and they get to him, that short kicks behind the line. And Burton played that really well for Panthers last season. And so before we move on to the next part, so what I wanted to talk about was how we think the game's going to be played, how we think this game's going to unfold. I'll come back to you again, Mark. So how do you see this one playing out with the side that New South Wales picked?
Look, I'm a New South Wales supporter, so of course I'm going to say I'm confident New South Wales are going to win. Yeah. Look, it's really hard to win in Sydney, which Queensland did though. So certainly one of the things I'd say is normally no favour is going to Perth because it's a neutral ground. If we're going to Queensland, it'd be a lot harder, which is what my fears are for Game 3. Yeah. But for Game 2, look, I do think that it'll play out where New South Wales will get more rub of the green. I think Fittler showed some of his experience with the talk that he did in the media, but also behind closed doors. I do think that the ruck will be similar, but I do think that New South Wales will be able to take advantage of it. And I think that the referees will be too scared to over-penalise in it with New South Wales' adjustments and after the wrath that they caught in Game 1. So people are saying, it's going to be changed. They're going to call it differently. You can't go from Origin 1 being called over here and then go, okay, cool, we're going to do it over here. It's just not going to happen. And especially, there'll be an outcry that the ref will get lynched in the street. You can't do it. So I think the New South Wales are going to be able to, I think the ruck will be largely cleaned up by New South Wales a lot more. And I think they've got the players in the squad to dominate that more. And I also think that they're, I know it's hard because that Queensland spirit's always there and Queensland are obviously going to go hard. But with all these Origin series, people forget it's very hard to go up 2-0, regardless of where the games are and regardless of what the squads are. Very, very hard to go up 2-0. A lot of the time it does go to a decider. And the New South Wales team is really good quality. And the other thing that I think we'll see play out is I don't think that Queensland actually had massive opportunities to score points and they only scored 16. And I think that that's going to become a problem for them because even the 16, they're relying on that Kalen Ponga pass, which I thought was forward. But anyway, and it bounced around and sort of, it wasn't a lucky try. They made the most of it and they did a good job, but it wasn't too slick either. And they also, the Munster strips that were happening and stuff as well, it was brilliant individual play, but it wasn't like they were tearing the Blues to strips and just smashing the defensive line apart everywhere. So I think that Queensland might struggle for points, whereas I think that New South Wales are actually built to be able to score points pretty well. And the biggest key for me is why I think New South Wales will win and be able to win fairly dominantly is because you won't see Cleary play that bad again. He had a very average game. He's arguably the best player in the game, and he got outplayed by half a dozen of the Queensland guys, including the entire spine. And I just don't see that happening again.
Yeah, I think something that, everybody talks about the ruck speed in that game, and I think something that they missed was that our blockers didn't do a very good job for Cleary. I mean, I hope that that's something that's addressed. I don't know if you watched the replays of it, but the minute they're going for Cleary, Haas is already running up the field. His job is to stay there and cause that ruck interference, if you like, for them to get to Cleary. So I found that quite frustrating.
That's where I think that Burton will actually come in. I agree with what you said. Maybe he won't take a heap of kicks, but what you'll find with the formation and the shape that they were playing with is that Luai wasn't even there as a secondary kick option. And it's something that Mitchell Pearce got punished for many years, where he had a Bird at 5'8", and even a Timmins, and some of these guys that weren't really halves. Yeah. And he didn't ever have a second option, so he had to put in these kicks under pressure, and he got hammered for that. But the same thing happened to Cleary. Normally, ideally, you'd want an option on either side of the ruck of Cleary, so he'd be able to spin it. He never even looked to spin it because Luai wasn't even there. So you're right with the blockers, but it's also the other kickers' jobs as well to give him options.
Yeah, that's right. So what do you got to say on that, Ross?
Oh, well, I'm not expecting New South Wales to play as bad as what they did the first game in the next game. I mean, especially with the changes that they've made. I think we'll dominate that left side a bit this game around with having Burton and Luai there together, considering they've played together before. And obviously Burton will take a bit of pressure. I'm expecting a massive game from Cleary. I think he's going to have a big game. He's going to be up for this one after the first game. And I think our forwards will probably dominate with the bench that we've got as well, with Talakai and Angus coming off the bench. And I can see New South Wales just trying to slow the ruck down a lot more than what it was for the first game too. Just for, because we just got absolutely smashed after that 20-minute period in that first Origin game. So yeah, I think New South Wales will win by, I don't know, 10 points or something like that. So expect Cleary. I think Cleary will get man of the match too. So
I think Fittler got found wanting, if I'm being honest. I think that New South Wales picked a side that they saw could put on points and play football, and they forgot about that it's actually Origin and that it's actually played different. And so, but I agree with you all in the sense that I see more points in this side. I think that when I look at the two sides, and we'll come to Queensland next, I see more points in this New South Wales side. Tim?
Yeah, look, it's hard to argue with anything that you guys have said. Look, I'll be honest, I am a diehard Queensland fan and lived in Queensland my whole life. But look, I'll be honest, I tipped New Zealand, good on me, New South Wales for game 1. And I'll probably tip New South Wales for game 2 as well. I think the changes that they've made and the reasons why they've made the changes are spot on. I think the Gerbo is in there as well for that protection on Cleary. He's just that bigger body, but he's a bit more mobile than some of the other boys. And he does that really well with DCE at Manly. So I think that's another reason why he's in there, is to slow the players getting through to Cleary, to give Cleary more time, and then to obviously slow down the Queensland ruck speed. Yep. So, yeah, look, that's I think I was a bit dubious on the Talakai call, but I think because they've moved Maddo out, they need a different kind of player coming off the bench. Obviously, they've got enough players in the New South Wales team. Like if Teddy goes down, then they could move Crichton back there. They've got enough moving parts that they probably needed somebody who could play in the centres. I know with Queensland, we like to move Kurt Capewell out there when we have those issues. So he's that kind of player. He obviously played a lot in the centres when he was initially came into the NRL. So for him, it's not such a big change. And I think that's what they've tried to do with Talakai. They've got somebody who can play quite well in the centres, but someone who can play a role in the forward pack as well. And that's what he's there for. So, yeah, look, I'll be honest, I was really skeptical about that first. I didn't really quite understand why that particular change got made. But the more I'm thinking about it, the more I read about it, it seems a smarter play for them.
I agree with you that Talakai probably has better leg speed than Maddo playing as a centre, but I'm not sure I agree that Talakai is a better defender than Maddo is. And Maddo also can move across in that centre position, and even Murray. But Maddo's the one. I mean, Maddo does it quite well for Parramatta. He did it well for the Roosters as well. And Roosters. Yeah, Roosters.
Yep. The Roosters. Unfortunately, we lost him. And I'll add there too, though, one of the things with Maddo, like in the difference of players, I think Maddo's a tremendous player. I loved him all the way through juniors. I was so glad the Roosters signed him. I was unhappy they, had to let go of him. Yeah. But one thing with him is that he's not an impact player. Like I think that he's better than Talakai, and I think he'll probably go down at the end of both their careers, and he'll be the better player. Yeah. And he's probably better right now. But Talakai is the type of player that can come on and be a 20-minute impact. Yeah. Whereas Madison is he's coming off the bench now for Parra, and I don't even think it works that well for them. As good as he's playing, like I think he's an 80-minute edge player, and I think that's where you get the best out of him. He needs to be on the field and have opportunities come his way, and he'll make a lot out of them. But if you say to Ryan Madison, you've got 25 minutes or 20 minutes, come off the bench and make a huge impact in a den, he's just not that type of guy.
Yeah. Yeah, I get it. I like him at second row. I mean, I had him and Gus as my second rowers, and I still stand by. I believe that would have been the best two for us. Tim?
Like you said, he's a kind of player that can play at top speed or his top speed for 80 minutes. He's not the Talakai that can come on and run like bloody 11.5-second hundreds for the sake of 20-metre barge and run through and crash and that sort of stuff. And that's what they needed. They needed more attacking flair. They need more options than just swing it to Cleary and put a kick through. They need more of that attacking play, and that's obviously what he's there for.
All right.
I don't see him getting big minutes either. I do think he'll be just the kind of player that will, unless there's an injury that he moves into the centres or something, I think he will just play that 20-minute role. It might be 15 minutes either side of half time or something like that. And I think that's about what his place is going to be.
Yeah, some of the stuff that Talakai done for the Sharks when he was playing off the bench, I agree with you. He can be that. He can really bring a lot of speed into the middle and take up those quick hits, get the ball up and play them quickly. So I'm looking forward to seeing how this game unfolds. I'll move to the Queensland side. I don't like talking about them, but we have to, in the fairness of evenness, talk about the Queenslanders. And so, look, they've made 2 changes. Both of their changes were forced. So they've got Tuolagi coming in for Coates, and they have Flegler coming in for Cotter. Arrow, sorry. Right you are. Arrow coming in for... So who moved in from the bench to their expanded squad, into the actual starting 17?
Arrows moved into the 17.
Oh, is that right? I thought it was Flegler.
Yeah, no. So Flegler's still in the extras.
Oh, right.
Yeah, Arrow moved straight into the 17.
Okay, thanks for that clarification. Like all that homework for nothing. I get one mistake per pod. All right, so look, let's talk about the changes first. Cotter out's a big one for me. Mark, what do you think?
I think Cotter's a huge blow. He suited that game really well. I think if it was an older style Origin game, he still would have suited it, but I don't think he would have been as effective. But the fact that he can go for the 80 minutes, make 1 million tackles and have that stamina, and also his sort of speed around the ruck. Obviously, he's a transition hooker into a middle forward. It's I don't think that Queensland can actually replace that. It's going to have to be a communal effort from that forward pack. Yep. And I think that I'm not sure whether they'll be able to play strong enough to be able to make up for Cotter not being there and dominate New South Wales like they did in game 1. Arrow is a decent player. I probably had him in my 17 instead of Jeremiah Nanai. Like I probably had him as the 17 jersey because he can play edge very easily. He can play middle. I think he's a good player, but he's not going to be anywhere near what Cotter could do, and he doesn't have the motor that Cotter has. So huge loss for them, and I don't think that they've actually been able to replace it, and I don't think they will.
For a lot of us that have played Supercoach for a while, we'll remember the Arrow of the Gold Coast Titans. He's incredible work around the middle, and what Cotter and Carrigan both did in that Origin game was nothing short of phenomenal. But Cotter, I agree, he was like the energizer buddy, and I think he's a big loss for that side. I agree with you. I think it's going to be difficult for them to replace that energy that he brought, the line speed, the defence. I'll come to you first because you're a Queenslander. Timmy, what do you think of the ins and the Queensland side as a whole?
Yeah, look, the Tuolungi, it was probably only a matter of time, and he was probably only an injury away anyway. Like he was sort of certainly in the mix, and a lot of people had him in their side, so that one's neither here nor there. The Cotter one is massive, and this is exactly why I'd be tipping New South Wales for this game. Just throw a stat at you two guys. I heard on the radio this morning, Queensland actually haven't won game 2 for 4 years. So the fact that it's gone to neutral territory, I did hear this afternoon that apparently traditionally when games go over to Perth, Perth really stick it to New South Wales. So mind you, I'm listening to radio in Queensland, so take that with a grain of salt. But from the footy players that were on and that have spoken during the week and stuff, everyone seems to keep saying that that the Perth fans seem to get really behind Queensland. A lot of our industry guys up here that work out in central Queensland and things like that, when those contracts finish up, they all go to Perth and work there, call it the off season, call it whatever you like. But so yeah, and then they obviously come back to Queensland and do the fly in, fly out thing. So I think from the sounds of things, it's going to be more of a home game for us than it will for New South Wales, and that's great for us. But yeah, not winning a game 2 for 4 years, I think that's a pretty heavy one that it's been talked about in camp, is my understanding. So they want to fix that one. Yeah, but look, the Cotter, I can't see where we replace 65 tackles. There's nobody else in our team. I mean, Carrigan, I love him. He's awesome. Mad Broncos fan and a huge fan of Paddy. But I mean, you're talking the best part of 120, 130 tackles between 2 blokes. You take that one bloke out of there, and all of a sudden you've got to put him in there. Like Nanai's not going to pick up the slack and get 60 tackles. Jai Arrow of 5 or 6 years ago, sure, he'd be good for 50 or 60 tackles. Now he's more good for 35 to 45 tackles on a good day. He's certainly not the player that he was 5 or 6 years ago. I think that's where we're missing the depth. I think that there's probably not the same second string of guys coming through in that forward pack. I think some of the young guys have really stepped up this year. But I mean, we've over the last few years we've dropped Corey, we've lost Moose, we've lost that's Josh McGuire. I mean, Arrow's not what he was. We've lost So many forwards over the last few years. We've kept the guys in the backs really well. But, yeah, I mean, we've lost Cam Smith. So you're talking a number of guys now that are big tackle bots that are just not there anymore. I think Cotto was our saving grace, and he's gone.
The other thing with Cotter too that I'll just throw in there is making tackles in Origin is a hell of a lot harder than making tackles in the NRL. So I think everybody saw the stats on the speed of the game, and that's also a clue on the intensity as well. So if you're making 65 tackles in the NRL, maybe it's equivalent to making 40 tackles in Origin, because every one of those hits takes 50% more out of you. And those guys all have less in the tank for being in an Origin game tackling than being in an NRL game tackling. So the fact that Cotter could absorb that and still do his normal work rate is pretty big, because even if Arrow was doing 40, 50 tackles again in Origin, it's probably more like 30, 35, because it takes that much extra out of you and the intensity's up.
And that's what scares me, mate. The fact that like Jai Arrow's not making 50 tackles a game in NRL level anymore. So then you take his 50 or 60 that he used to get in Origin, take it back to, like, what are we talking? All of a sudden he's going to be good for 25, 30 tackles, something like that. I'm sure he'll get more than that, but we're missing a massive chunk of solid defence there.
And when you've got these other guys trying to make up for it, that are fatigued more, that are having to do extra work and make up for it, that's when the ruck opens up even more. And even if it was last game, that would happen. But if it's this game and New South Wales get the rub of the green a little bit and also have a side that can dominate the ruck, and I think they're going to play through it, it's danger signs, I think, for Queensland.
The only way I think that they could combat it is maybe leave Ben Hunt on for a while longer and play Hunt and Harry. But then obviously that opens up other issues that could be exposed. But yeah, I know Ben Hunt can make a tackle count in Origin, and he's proven that. But obviously he's playing halves at the Dragons. He's not a hooker anymore, but I've got no doubt he's still got it in him.
Mate, I'll never sell Hunt short. He's actually highly rated by me. But what I saw in the first game that really made me nervous when I spoke to this about others was the bench with Grant coming on. I mean, Grant makes me nervous to start with. I mean, both spines, New South Wales and Queensland, are both very strong. But when I looked at our spine, our bench versus their bench, I mean, we got Cook now, they got Grant. I like that. But Grant, Carrigan, Cotter all come on. I saw, Grant around the ruck play, and then the leg speed of Cotter and Carrigan. I mean, and it proved correct. When those two came on, it literally was the difference. They lifted that side. I'll come to you, Ross. What do you think of this Queensland side, mate?
Oh, well, the changes obviously make sense. I mean, Talangi deserves his spot in the team. He's been probably one of the form wingers in the comp, to be honest with you. Both Cowboys are just fine this year. So, but with Cotter, that's just a massive out. It's a huge out for Queensland. Like that ruck speed, the tackles, like it's just everything. Like he's just a bunny. He just doesn't stop. He just keeps going and going. And I can see New South Wales exposing that in the middle of the ruck for Queensland, not having him there making those tackles, and then not having Carrigan coming on after 20 minutes and, exposing our weak, forwards that are tired after 20 minutes because he's starting. Like, he's going to probably come on. He'll probably play like the first 20, 30 minutes, and then I can see him getting taken off because he's just going to be exhausted from making so many tackles. And I can really see New South Wales exposing the middle, and I think Cotter's just a massive loss. Like, he's just been come from nowhere this year. He's just been absolutely probably one of the best forwards in the game this year. So it's just a huge out for Queensland. It really is. So, yeah. But yeah, I mean, Arrow's a good player. He can play, as you said, in the middle or on the edge or wherever. But I just think that's a massive loss for them, and they're definitely going to miss him.
Who Cameron Munster reminds me of, and I mean, I'm sure Queensland viewers probably agree with it, is as to the impact he has in Origin, is Wally Lewis. He's not the same kind of body, but the impact that Lewis used to have when he came on, or what he was always on as the six, and but Munster has that same X factor when he plays. He's just he's the one I wish wasn't in the side. He frustrates me. All right, guys, look, we'll move on to the next section, which I was going to talk about the actual coaches. So firstly I want to talk about Fittler and then talk about Slater. And what I'll do, we'll talk about Fittler first. So what do you think of Fittler as a coach, Mark?
Oh, geez, that's a loaded question for me. So,
Be honest, mate, because I haven't.
I'll be honest. Don't worry. I've been pretty heavy on my criticism of some of the media narratives around Fittler and also some fan narratives around him as well. I disagree with a lot of it. I don't think he's the best coach ever, but he's also someone who's still got a lot of time in his coaching career. And I just I understand that I might be in the minority with some of my thinking, but I'm more than happy to be, because I just some of the things like Fittler being outcoached by Billy Slater is again just a ludicrous media headline, just grabbing clicks, and that's all it is. There's nothing in that game won from Queensland that was any different than what you would expect those Queensland players to play at. There was nothing. There was no Billy fingerprints on there. There was a lot of Melbourne players and a lot of players in general that like to slow the ruck down anyway. And Queensland generally have that type of style, which can suit Origin really well as well. And there was nothing revolutionary about what Queensland were doing. Like I said, their attack scored 16 points, and it was off a lot of individual efforts, which are guys like Munster making these huge plays. There was really nothing to tell me that Slater outcoached Fittler. With what Fittler actually did, I think it can also get lost in all of it that, I was chatting about this on the All Stars podcast a few weeks ago and laughing a little bit about Luke Garrity that jumps on, and he's always great. He's a fantastic footy brain. But, one of the things that we're saying is it's every time Origin comes around, there's Fittler criticism. But when a series is won or the game's won, you don't hear it again. But the same stuff comes up every year, right? So there was all the selection stuff this year again. When he put Tom Trbojevic in the centres, everyone said the same stuff. Why are you putting a fullback at centre? What is this? It's silly playing guys out of position. Whiten at the start when he put him at centre, he played great. And even this time we got Whiten bashing again. He was our best player. Nobody ever comes back and apologises, but everybody goes back and just be quiet until the next series and then says Fittler can't coach. He's won 3 out of 4 series. And then the other argument as well is, well, he's not a good coach because, the players have carried him to those. He didn't have a Queensland dynasty with a spine that was going to all be immortals. Not at all, and not even remotely close. Maybe Nathan Cleary will get there one day. Tedesco probably won't, but he'll be, up there. But Damien Cook's nowhere near a Cameron Smith. And that team that New South Wales have had the last 4 years haven't been anywhere near it. And people forget that before that, there was a dynasty, and Fittler had to actually engineer a new way of looking at everything for New South Wales as a team, as a program, everything. And he ripped it all up and started again. And the result is he's won 3 out of 4. And if he wins this game, he's going to be one off winning that third game to coming 4 out of 5 series, which not very many coaches do at State of Origin level. So I think that Fittler is a good coach. And I think that he fits certain teams and certain aspects of rugby league better than others, for sure. And he's still got a lot of growing to do, and he can make mistakes. But a lot of coaches do, and I think the criticism is sometimes unwarranted to a degree. And it's a bad trait of New South Wales fans. We don't stick loyal as much and support as much as what we like to criticise sometimes. And it's a little bit unfortunate. Whereas, I always say Queensland are the wrong end of the spectrum too. They're just the other side where they don't want to criticise at all, and everyone's the best player ever and should be immortal. It's what both camps do. But yeah, Fittler for me, not the best coach ever. Still got a lot of time to improve, but I wouldn't say he's a bad coach at all.
Interesting. You touched on a couple of points there that I want to talk about. So one of them was the Storm influence. So Billy Slater being the coach who came through the Storm system, to me, it was no surprise that they were going to play a very Storm-like game. Look, I think Fittler's a good coach too. The problems I have with Fittler at times, it is based around selection, but unlike others, I really like Turbo Latrell selections at centre, left and right centre. I thought that was great. And I loved that when Fittler came in, he changed the attitude of what it meant to be to play New South Wales. To play for our state now meant something, and he made that something. I remember going with my whole family, my kids and my ex, everyone went to the Origin where we won the year before last, before COVID. And it was fantastic to watch. We were right up high and just watching the structure, the way the game was played. Look, I'm a big fan of Fittler. But I'm a big fan of Greg Alexander too. I think,
yes.
I think people undersell his influence on that. My problem sometimes stems with, I feel like we don't always pick the best forwards that we've got. But, I don't know the brainstorm that's going on there. And as you rightly pointed out, look, Fittler's record speaks for itself. Given the last 15 years, or at least last 10 years of Origin, Fittler's certainly given New South Wales something to rejoice and enjoy and to get behind. So yeah,
I'll just quickly jump in and throw in on the selection one that you throw up there as well. I agree. Like, even though I'm a supporter of Fittler and his coaching style, there's teams in the last 4 years where I've picked and changed 2 or 3 spots that I would have. But one of the things I think that we forget is that we're choosing on form and, you know, how we see players go at NRL level. Whereas from Fittler's perspective, I do think if people stop and listen to what's said in the New South Wales camp, you actually understand why he's picked certain players, because he's trying to win a game of footy. Yep. And he's trying to do it in a structure and a strategy that he thinks is going to get him a win. And he's been successful at that. But what that means is that sometimes on form or even the better player isn't necessarily going to be the best fit for how he thinks that they're going to win the series.
Yeah, well, I was quite critical of Whiten, and I'm happy to say that I was wrong. I mean, Whiten stood up and he played a good game. I really like what Whiten done, and it's a shame that he didn't get to play this game because he was he was our best player in my opinion.
I had Campbell Graham there and he was amazing, Whiten, so I would have been silly if I put him there after how Whiten played.
Yeah, well, I had Campbell Graham there too. I had Graham and Critter. So that, and like you said, we go on based on what we see week to week. But I didn't mind the idea of Whiten playing 14. It was Burton or Whiten for me at 14. Ross?
Yeah, I don't mind Freddie as a coach. I think he's done a pretty good job with what he's done with New South Wales over the last 4 or 5 years since he's been in charge. And he's not afraid to make, out of position, decisions and stuff as well, putting blokes like Latrell and Tommy in the centres. And, I wasn't a fan when I saw that Jack Whiten was picked in centres like a lot were. And we're sitting there shaking our head going, why are we leaving out blokes like Campbell Graham, who's probably one of the best centres in the comp? Why is he doing this? But he's been around long enough to, he knows what he's doing. That's the thing. Like he's Jack Whiten's actually quite a decent defender. I actually think, like in the centres, not in the halves. I don't think he is for Canberra, but yeah, I don't mind him as a coach. I think he's okay. As for club level, I don't know how you go coaching a team at club level, but I think he's there. He's made for Origin as a coach, but probably not so much as a club coach. But yeah, I don't mind him. I think he's doing a pretty good job with what he's had. I mean, you look at the Queensland squad they've had the last few years, and you've got blokes like Cameron Smith, Billy Slater, and that there, and I think he's done a pretty good job with where he's got to work with.
Yeah, one of the things I liked about Fittler was you probably remember a few years ago what he did with Latrell Mitchell when Latrell Mitchell was being a bit of a mug, and he didn't let him near the side and made Latrell earn his way back. And when he did, look what he did, Latrell. Look, what are your thoughts on our coach, Timmy?
It's a tough one, boys. I like listening to this chat with you guys because obviously being in Queensland, we don't give a shit. You could stick bloody Farmer Brown out there and wouldn't get 2 hoots. The Queensland media actually don't get as upset about it as you boys do. We just put someone in there that's bloody Origin royalty, and we know he's going to get more Origin royalty blokes around him. And I mean, obviously Billy's the one that's having the final say on everything, but I've got no doubt that it's more of a coaching panel, coaching team, coaching whatever, and then throw Alfie in the mix with the Queensland boys and anything could happen. Up here, we just don't seem to hear as much of the bitching and moaning. You guys certainly bitch and moan about Freddie more than what we do. We don't need to put shit on him. Your state does enough of it. I'm interested to see. I know there's been a lot of talk lately about maybe he takes the Bulldogs job or gets one of these vacant coaching gigs. I'm interested to see what your brains are thinking as to how that would go. Freddie's done a really good job as far as I can see from the outset. I've never been a Freddie fan. It's a bit like I can't stand Joey Johns, and don't get me started on that immortal horseshit. That's a whole other issue in itself. I could sit here for hours bitching mode. But as far
I agree with you. You shouldn't have been the 8th. You should have been like the 4th or 5th. You had to wait too long.
Hold on, just give me a second. Yeah, that makes me better. Righto. Yeah, anyway, look, as far as Freddie goes, I think because Queensland played so well and played the game so differently and won for so long, you guys needed a coach that had to come in and do something different. And let's be honest, that's exactly what Freddie is. The bloke is about as different as they come. He brought in all the new different coaching styles, the walk on the grass with your shoes off and doing the whole breathing thing. And that sort of started then coming into the NRL. The whole mindset, changing the mindset of players and coaching Origin completely differently. I'd be really interested. I think he's a great coach for Origin. He's got, 6 or 8 days to get boys in that can all play footy together. He's got to try and find a way to get through to them all so they can all play footy together instead of coming from bloody 16 different teams. I think he's great at that. I'm very interested to see how he would go at coaching NRL for 40 weeks a year and do the same sort of thing. Would he be the same kind of coach, or would he go back to being a traditional NRL coach like all the other NRL coaches are? Is he the kind of bloke that can have his own dynasty like bloody Bellamy or Bennett or any of those guys? I'm not convinced. But, yeah, I'm interested to hear your thoughts because, like I said, we don't hear the shit up here that you guys do.
I've been waiting for you to end on that. So last year, New South Wales had the opportunity to do something that no one's ever done before, which was win 3-0 in Queensland. And I heard a lot of whinging and whining from Gordon Tallis, Wally Lewis, and all the usual suspects.
I'm sure Corey Parker had something to say too.
Parker had a lot to say. Parker and that other one, Hodgkinson. What's that show that they were doing up in Brisbane? And they were blaming everyone but the farmer's wife for what was going wrong in Queensland last year. But the squad that they had last year is nothing near what they got this year. I mean, and it's the fact that the Broncos and the Cows are doing well. I mean, the Cows, just off topic, have recruited incredibly well, I think, by bringing youth into their into that side. And I think that's what Origin needs more of. Is that sometimes people go too much with what's worked and don't bring enough of that youth in between all that. All right, before we move on, is there anything else anyone wanted to say on Fittler before we get to Slater?
No, you go, sorry.
Yeah, sorry, I guess same sort of thing as like what you were saying, Glenn. Look at the two coaches that the Cowboys and the Broncos have brought in, though. They're both two different coaches. They're not traditional style coaches. Up at the Cowboys, he has got his ass kicked numerous times for making the tough decisions, like putting Tormalolo, their $1 million man, on the bench, playing him for half an hour and all that, and he's copped so much shit for it. Look at where they are now. He's not afraid to make the tough decisions. Obviously, Kevy had a bit of a baptism of fire last year. The Bronx have been shit for 3 years, but look at where they are now. So maybe Freddie being a different style of coach, maybe these are the blokes that are coming through now. I can tell you now, teaching these kids that are coming through, I've been teaching 18 years and my job is very different to what it was 18 years ago. The kids now are very different to what they were 18 years ago. I don't think the NRL is any different. I think the players now are different to what they were 18 years ago. They'd have a fight and they'd have a beer after the game and everything was good. I think things are a bit different now.
Yeah, and I wanted to touch on your point too about how Fittler would go at Clubland. I actually think that it gets a little bit like a lot of things in sport, especially. Everyone looks at things in black and white. You know, he's going to be good at this. He's not going to be good at this. When, like in life, most of the answers are in that grey area. And it's the same thing with NRL coaches. There's so many coaches that if you put them in a different situation than what they've been in, if they've been experiencing success for a decade, they'd be experiencing a lot less success and they might have even been sacked in a different situation. They just don't work the same in every club, even the best ones. You've really got to be top of the line. But I mean, someone like Wayne Bennett went to Newcastle and ostensibly failed. Yeah. And people forget these type of things. Brad Fittler, I think, will be an excellent coach of the Bulldogs. In fact, I think he's the number one option for them. I don't think they can do any better. Yeah. Because his fit with Gould is perfect, because both of them have the relationship and the respect for each other, where he'll be allowed to do his job, but he's also got the confidence to say, hey, Gus, rack off. I'm doing it this way. And Gus will actually say, okay. There's very few people that Gus has that respect for where he'll be able to do that and take his hands off. They'll work marvellously together. That's a huge deal. The roster lends itself to Fittler. As much as he's left guys like Addo-Carr out, he has a relationship with Josh and other guys that are on there too. Him and Matty Burton. I mean, Matty Burton's an aspiring 5'8" of the future for the next decade as a star in the NRL, and Brad Fittler's an arguable immortal at that position. You know, there's a lot of big boxes that get ticked. Whereas if you put Brad Fittler at the Tigers, I don't think he'd go anywhere near as well. And he might even quit after 2 years because I don't think he'd like it. But Madge Maguire's there at the moment, and then he gets sacked. But people forget that Madge Maguire went to South and was very successful and won a premiership. And people can say as much as they like that, oh, well, you know, it was the players. But South weren't, you know, the number one team or anything to win a premiership that year. They were a contender. They had a good squad. But Madge built them for a couple of years and got them to a premiership. Now, his coaching style worked for that team and for that club and what they had. It didn't for the Tigers, and it probably never was going to be honest. It's the same thing with Fittler. I think he's a good coach. And for the Bulldogs, I think he's absolutely perfect and no one will be better. Last thing with him on the Bulldogs, he's got the profile as well and the respect. One thing that you'll notice with every Origin player that's ever been in camp with Fittler, let alone played for him, but guys that just were there, all want to get on the field and die for him. Every one of them loves playing for Brad Fittler. And he has that relationship with all those sort of players. And that's a really, really strong quality of his that he can bring to a club, and that'll really help him.
I just wanted to address three things. So firstly, Brad Fittler isn't a mortal in my opinion, and always will be, as you just said. One of the best 5'8s to ever play the game. And even in lock, anywhere he played, he was good. Two, I agree with that. What you were saying, which is what I was going to lean to, was I think that he will draw players being there. And I remember when he had that stint at the Roosters, and I think a lot of people forget that the Roosters want success now. Whereas with the Bulldogs, that's not going to be so much the issue, where he can be a little bit innovative and have some time to build towards building a proper roster based around, what he sort of sees in the future. So I really think Fittler is a perfect fit for the Dogs. I really do.
At the Roosters too, that was 15 years ago, which people forget. He was actually the youngest coach in the NRL when he took over at that point. And there was no one even close to his age, and he was only 3 years removed playing. So he was coaching some guys that he was playing with a few years before. In his first coaching job or coaching in any capacity, he'd never had any coaching experience at all. So you just throw that out the window, because that was just an absolute baptism of fire. And it was so bad that he actually said, I don't want to coach again.
And actually, what you bring up there's a very important fact, is the fact that he played with players. It was very hard for him to distinguish himself as coach and not mate. You know what I mean? Like when you've played with these guys, they're your mates. They're the guys. So now he's seen differently. You know what I mean? So the respect level would be differently. And 15 years is a long way to learn. You know what I mean? I believe he would have learned a lot in between that duration. All right, we'll move on to Billy Slater. We'll start with you this time, Tim Singer of Queenslander. Billy Slater, what do you think about his appointment?
Yeah, look, I guess similar sort of thing to Freddie. Like he's a different kind of coach. Obviously, he's spent a lot of time with Bellyache, and in the system there. And I think I had no doubt whatsoever that Cam Smith was coming straight in. I had no doubt JT was coming straight in. The guys lived and breathed Origin footy for so long. But not only that, they have worked so well together for so long. And played a lot of rep footy together. So there's obviously a lot of brain smarts there, a lot of guys that know a lot about footy. So I'm not surprised that they basically decided to put together their own coaching team. I've got no doubt that Billy's still got the final say, but I think he would be crazy not to be leaning on those guys fairly heavily. Look, I think it's a great fit for Origin. He's a different kind of bloke. He's one of the boys, but at the same time, he's a fairly quiet guy too, and you can see his thinking processes on the coaching panel, like not on the coaching panel, on the commentary panels and things like that all the time. You can see his brain's ticking over, and he's thinking about different stuff that other guys aren't necessarily thinking about when they're talking footy. So, look, I like it. I think he's a great coach for the short period. I guess it's kind of like the Fittler thing. I'd be interested to see how he would go long term in a coaching thing. I wouldn't be surprised if he's the next Bellyache going to Storm. I could see he'd be the guy that would go into that system. I've got no doubt he's probably made some phone calls. Obviously, Bellamy's an ex-New South Wales coach, but I've got no doubt that Billy's probably asked him for plenty of advice about coaching and just preparation and things like that. But I'm sure Billy's all over it anyway. So, yeah, I think as far as a coach goes, I think he's made the right decisions. We've talked about the pluses and minuses of the squads, but I think he's been a good appointment.
Yeah, I really like Slater. He was, in my opinion, one of the best players I've ever seen, and I've watched football for a lot of years, and very meticulous when you listen to what people say about him in his preparation. Mark?
Yeah, I actually think that it was a really good appointment. I probably will say, and this will sound like a criticism, but it's actually the opposite. It's actually to protect Billy. I think that people need to pump the brakes a little bit too, because I'd hate to see Billy get put up with all these expectations that Queenslanders are rightly going to have, and even just the wider community to say he's this great coach, and even the comments about, oh, he outcoached Fittler and he dominated the Blues and all this, it's way too early. We don't even know what type of coach he's going to be yet. He's got the potential to be a fantastic coach. He's got the brains for it. He's got the demeanour for it. He's got the respect for it. And he's got the playing resume for it. He's a perfect fit for it, but we just don't know yet. So I'll reserve judgment on how good I think he'll be until we see a bit more, because I don't think we've seen anything yet. But I do have a slight concern on how much it will affect him. And I hope that it doesn't get to that where he'll get put up a little bit too high, like if they win this series especially. And then all of a sudden when he has his failures, which are going to happen, and he has his learnings, which are going to happen because it's very natural to. I mean, Todd Payton, for 2 years, I said, was an awful coach. And he even showed trappings of that at the start of this year. But he's learnt a lot in that 2.5 years. And credit to him, he's actually changed things. But 2 years ago, he was terrible. And he's not now. Billy Slater, unfortunately, with his resume and what he's done all around football, and also being front and centre in the media and everywhere, he's going to have a really big fall, and it could really debilitate a good coaching career potentially if people don't pump the brakes a little bit on him. So I think it's a great fit. I think especially with the panel that he's got there. But one of the best learnings that you can have in sport is failure.
Yep.
And once we see him fail, then you'll see how much of a better coach he's going to be in the future.
Yeah, look, that's almost on par with what I wanted to say, was that you really judge coaches by what they do through those tough periods, and he will get them, whether it's now or whether it's down the track. I like the idea of Slater, but he still has, some learning to do. And Payton, I agree with you. I've never liked Payton. I feel like what he's done well this year is brought youth and energy into the side. And I think that's maybe where the mistake was he made. Ross?
Well, it's kind of hard to judge. I mean, isn't it really? I mean, he's in his first series and first time as a coach too, but obviously, he was the right fit for the position. He's got JT to bounce off. He's got Cam Smith to bounce off as well. But yeah, I just need to see a bit more first to see how he goes. I can see him taking over Bellamy as coach at the Storm, but whether that's in the next couple of years or whether they keep him running in as Queensland coach for a while first, just to see how he goes. I don't know, but yeah, it'll be nice to see how he goes as if he does take over the Storm. Not having folks like Cam Smith and JT and that to lean on, but yeah, I think he's a good fit for it, to be honest with you. So yeah, there's not much more to say. I've got much to say on it. So yeah,
coaching in clubland and coaching 3 games of Origin is a hell of a lot different.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's the one thing.
That's what I was saying before. Those boys know what it takes in a short period of time to put bodies together for a particular purpose. Those guys have played so much rep footy that they know the system in and out, and they know what you got to do in 2 weeks. Whether they can drag it out over 40 weeks, let's see.
But
I think that's a long way off anyway. I can't see him. He's not going to be putting his hand up for the Tigers job. He's not going to put his hand up for the Bulldogs job.
It would be a huge mistake if Bellamy steps away next year and they put Slater straight in.
No,
it would be
absolutely.
a massive mistake.
He would need to do like Stephen Kearney, like those other. Look at the head coaches we've got now who have bought their time as assistant coaches. Some of those coaches are going to be really, really good coaches because they've been in good systems for a long time. I think Bill needs to do that. I don't think he's going to be the guy that's going to come straight out of Origin and then grab a club and win a premiership. I don't see that happening.
Look, especially with the amount of players that Melbourne are losing next year as well. I mean, we've seen what Bellamy can do. He's probably the best coach in the NRL by far. Like, Bennett's up there too, obviously, but what Bellamy can do with these players who've come from other clubs that aren't great players at other clubs, the way he turns them into absolute gun players, Billy Slater's not going to do something like that. He's not going to come there and do that in Melbourne. And I honestly think Melbourne are going to struggle next year too, to be honest with you, just with the amount of players that they're losing. Like, they'll always be a top 8 team, but I don't think they'll be that force next year that they've always been, where they're going to be in the top 4 on a regular basis, especially once Bellamy goes too.
What I was going to say was that when you're coaching Origin, there's not a lot of coaching really that needs to be done. It's more about building relationships and, there's obviously some coaching, but the coaching that you would do in a week-to-week grind is a hell of a lot different. You don't have every player that plays Origin is a class player that pretty much knows what they're doing, you know what I mean? It's just all about game plans and stuff. All right, we'll move on to the last and final topic. So this one won't go for too long. What I wanted to just quickly touch on was, do you think they're doing enough to advertise the game? When I look at the games of the old and I see the Harrigans and the Carrolls holding each other, pulling each other in, and you know what I'm talking about, that old time kind of biff. I just don't think that the grudge seems to, I don't think the players and the coaches are doing enough to advertise the game. I'll come to you first, Mark. Do you have an opinion on that, mate?
Oh boy, this is a loaded one too.
I only come loaded.
Asking someone that that consults and owns a marketing company to make people money and advertise what the NRL is doing at the moment with it, I think it's terrible, honestly. And it's a lot of different reasons. Like, I think that, one, they're scared. And it's obviously it's a lot more PC and things and everything else, but they're too scared. The way they're targeting their marketing, I've got a huge problem with, because there's the old non-PC saying of get the soccer mums to the games, and that's what they're looking at, really. They're getting the mums involved and the girls involved and stuff. Where look, the reality is it's just gone way overboard, where you've got to go for your target market as well. And they're just missing that mark too much. So that's one thing. They're leaving their rusted-on fans to get more rusty, which is something you don't want to do. And they're doing it, sacrificing that to get people in that are always going to be casual for the most part. So I just hate the way they're targeting their marketing. But the other thing with the actual marketing is, I think that something that's happening in a lot of sport is that because of all the different platforms and things now, that you're probably not seeing it all, because they're really focusing on online stuff. They're really focusing on social media stuff. They're really focusing on different things. But when you do that and you've got a similar marketing budget, what ends up happening is that you don't get as many glossy TV ads, and radio gets pulled right back because the radio listenership is ostensibly quite down. Although in rugby league circles, I'd say it's actually bucked that trend and it's still up. So I think that's a lot of what you see, them using other media that isn't as visible to the whole audience, just for certain people. So you only get snippets of it depending on what age bracket you're in or what you look at. And the other thing too is that how they're actually marketing it. I don't particularly love. Like, you'll never see an ad from 15 years ago where you see an all in blue, where you see the ad for Origin coming in a month is going to be someone yelling out cattle dog, and then a massive brawl happening, and this third grade hooker, busting Joey Johnson's mouth open. You're not going to see that. Yeah. But that's the sort of stuff that can really get you going. So their hands are tied a little bit, but I do agree a little bit that they should be doing a better job.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'll come to you first, Ross, and then I'm going to come back to you, Mark, and put you on the spot to see what you think that they could do, especially the coaches and the players. So I'll come to you first, Ross. Do you think there's not enough being done to advertise the Origin spectrum?
Yeah, I think so. I pretty much agree with what Mark says, to be honest with you. There's not really much more to add to it. I mean, that's not just the advertising, it's all sorts of stuff. They're talking about people not going to the games. Well, look how much it costs to go to a game of footy these days. Look how much, you take your family to the footy and it costs you $100 up for feed. Like, if you got to buy food and stuff, like everything, it's not just NRL, it's everywhere. And I get, everything's going up, and, we've got to do this and we've got to do that. But they're just not doing enough, as far as I'm concerned. To the game's behind where it used to be at, and it's disappointing to see where we're sitting at in regards to crowds and stuff at the games and stuff in particular.
Interesting. So, Mark, is there anything you think that the coaches or the players could do more? Like I think back to Gallen when he made the two head comments, or some of the some of that little niggle stuff that they used to say, the players used to say. But it's almost like they've all been stifled to not speak. Don't give them any inspiration. Like, they need more inspiration for Origin.
Yeah, well, I think there's two big points to that. Like, I think the first one is you've stamped that out of the game. And as a society, we've stamped that out of the game, which is a real shame. And if the NRL had a bit more of a backbone, they wouldn't. But unfortunately, with the NRL, one of the things that I don't like is that they always fold under social and community pressure. Even if they're right, they will do that. Yeah. And if I was a player 20 years ago, I would have said a lot of stuff. But now, well, I wouldn't say anything, because it's not worth me getting fined 25 grand or losing a couple of matches. And that's what happens. And you don't even have to say much. Gallen lost 25 grand for swearing on Twitter. and it was his own account. And that wasn't that long ago as well. You just can't say anything anymore out of context. And it's sort of hard because everybody jumps up and screams and talks about the cliches and everybody sounding the same and not saying anything different, but we're the cause of that. So that's really hard. So I don't know if we're ever going to really get out of it. But the second point that's really important is one of the things that the American sports do quite well is that they really hold the players accountable for media appearances and promotions and different things and whatever, because their CBA, their collective bargaining agreements with players on what they get paid and their benefits is actually linked to the revenue that those sports bring in. Now, people forget that that's actually one of the big arguments that happened, almost a decade ago with CBA that the NRL is currently under, where the players actually said, hang on, we want a lot more money because the NRL is actually making more and more and more and more, and our wages aren't going up that much. And if without the players, you're not going to get in. So they got, I think it was 40%. So 40% of the revenue that the game makes is based on what the players now get paid. But they used everything from the NRLPA to say that we want to be partners with the game. Okay, we should be partners. We're the players. We're running the game with you guys. We want to know about everything that you're doing. We want to know about your plans. We want to be a part of it. And the NRL went, okay, look, we're going to give you your money, but it's a partnership, okay? So we expect you to help us with the game as well. Yeah. And nothing has been done. What a player does today is either the same or worse than what they were doing 10 years ago. And it's really easy to blame the players, and I will. I think it's piss poor, and some of the clubs as well, especially because they're protecting their players and they're protecting themselves. They don't want to say stuff. We all get annoyed about the changes an hour before a game that we knew were going to happen. They're just dumb. Or injuries like in SuperCoach, where somebody's meant to play the next week for 6 weeks, but they know they're never playing, but they just don't give you the information. For that type of stuff, you actually get fined in the NFL and potentially docked points too. But I digress. The point is, you can blame the players, but the NRL has made a rod for their own back. And by being weak with all their management, in my opinion, this is the result of it. What they should be doing, and what I would change, is that I would remind people what their CBA is, why they're getting paid what they do, and what their roles are. And every job's got their own job descriptions. 75% of an NRL player's job description is playing footy and going to training. There's another 25% there. And if you don't want to fulfill it, you shouldn't be getting paid all the money. And they should be held accountable for that as much as what they do if they miss a training session.
Interesting. All right, we're going to finish up with the last question, which is a pretty simple one. Who wins in the second game and by what score, Ross?
New South Wales 26-12. And Cleary man of the match.
Nice. Mark?
I'm going to go New South Wales 28-10. And I'll go Teddy man of the match.
Yeah, nice. I like it. So I actually agree with Teddy man of the match one. I'm down for that. And I actually think 22-10 is my scoreline. All right, guys, we're going to finish up tonight. I just want to say thank you, Mark, for coming on tonight. And just before I get you to say anything else, make sure everybody out there that follows our page, check out the NRL All-Stars podcast. It really is one of the better podcasts. And I'm not just saying that because he's on. I'm saying it because it's actually true. It is one of the generally better podcasts. Thank you, Mark, for coming on.
Look, thanks very much. Very kind words, guys. And I appreciate you having me on. It was a lot of fun. I appreciate you saying that about the podcast. Love getting a bigger audience and people listening more. So certainly tune in, follow us on Twitter and NRL_SC_All-Stars. You get all the up-to-date stuff. But Spotify, iTunes, SoundCloud, Amazon, Audible, everything. Just search NRL All-Stars. You'll find the podcast and give us a go. But I appreciate you letting me come on. It was a lot of fun. I'll do it again.
Yeah, cheers. And Ross, thank you, mate, as always, for coming on.
Not a problem.
All right, guys. We'll finish it there. Tim's obviously left us, so I'll say goodbye for Tim.
I want to win. I want that trophy. I want that trophy. I want that trophy.